Hello everyone, today I want to talk to you about how, in the TikTok deal, China actually made very few concessions to the US. In addition, Trump announced that he might impose a 100% tariff on certain products. In fact, such a tariff would not really hurt China at all. The concessions China made to the US in the TikTok deal were much less than people imagined. On September 25th, US President Trump signed an executive order to push forward the acquisition of the US operations of the Chinese social media platform TikTok. Trump emphasized that this acquisition plan would comply with the US law passed last year regarding national security requirements. Vice President Pence said that TikTok is valued at $14 billion. But when Trump signed the executive order at the White House, he was chatting with reporters and said that there were about 4 or 5 world-class investors involved, including the boss of a major computer company Dell and media tycoon Murdoch, who would all participate in the acquisition. Media reports revealed that 3 companies, Oracle, Sequoia Capital, and Silver Lake Capital, would be the main investors in TikTok's US company, holding 50% of the shares. On the surface, it looks like Trump has won a great victory, successfully forcing the Chinese company ByteDance, which controls TikTok, to sell a controlling stake in its US operations. However, Trump only told half the story, and it was the half that was favorable for his own publicity, making it easier for him to boast to voters that he had won again. Meanwhile, China has kept a low profile regarding the TikTok deal, but both mainland and US media have revealed details of the transaction, and the full picture is not as it seems. Fluent Observer Network instigated the prototype of the TikTok transaction. It turns out that TikTok's US business will not only be divided into one company, but also into 2 companies. The foreign-controlled joint venture of Mansitz is one of the companies, TikTok US Data Security Joint Venture, not TikTok's overall US business. Bloomberg previously estimated that TikTok's overall US business is valued at approximately $40 billion, not the $14 billion mentioned now. According to the TikTok US business operation plan agreed upon by China and the United States, 2 main companies are involved, the main one of which is called Autonomous Beat TikTok US Company. This is the main operating company in the new plan. The business is divided into commercial and related operating activities, such as e-commerce, brand advertising, global interconnection business, and engineering and technical support, etc. This US main company will continue to be wholly owned by Autonomous Beat, while Trump and Musk were talking about the other company of the 2 main bodies, TikTok US Data Security Joint Venture, which will be injected into TikTok's US user data, plus content security, software security, and other related businesses. This joint venture is held by Autonomous TIAO with a 19.9% stake, which is less than 20%, that is, not even a joint venture, in compliance with US law. However, Autonomous TIAO's existing global shareholders also hold a 31% stake, and new investors, such as Jia Guan, hold a 50% stake. However, taking a single shareholder as an example, Autonomous TIAO holds 19.9% and is still the single largest shareholder. The board of directors holds 7 seats. Autonomous TIAO only holds 1 seat. Autonomous TIAO's current global shareholders hold 2 seats, new investors hold 3 seats, and the other seat is held by an independent director appointed by the board of directors. In terms of Autonomous TIAO's most critical algorithm, Autonomous TIAO still fully owns TikTok's algorithm and intellectual property rights. It will only authorize TikTok's US Data Security Joint Venture to use the relevant intellectual property rights and then charge the US joint venture a licensing fee. In fact, a careful analysis of the plans of the 2 companies shows that Autonomous TIAO, which is wholly owned by TikTok, is the US. The company still has 100% control over TikTok's most profitable e-commerce and brand advertising businesses, which are TikTok's main sources of income, while the US joint venture is responsible for data security and content security. In fact, all of these are high-cost businesses, not profitable businesses. In particular, content security requires the employment of a large number of auditors. It is estimated that in the future, this US joint venture will charge fees to TikTok's US subsidiary responsible for operations. Therefore, this joint venture is more like a rental company, not a real commercial operation company. This is similar to the current operations of US-funded technology companies in China. For example, the data that Apple needs to manage in China is placed in the company Yunxiang Guizhou, which is a 100% Chinese state-owned enterprise. Apple does not even have a stake in Yunxiang Guizhou. Instead, TikTok still holds a considerable stake in the new US joint venture that controls data. The outside world originally thought that TikTok would fully entrust all its operations to the US joint venture, which is similar to TikTok, Disney's overseas business model, but the original plan Trump and China reached was more limited. It was just to hand over the cost center, namely the data and security company, to the US joint venture for operation. This explains why Oracle would invest in this business, because data and security management has always been one of Oracle's main businesses. Investors investing in TikTok's US joint venture and then taking over this business can be said to be a direct calculation of the return on investment. In short, after difficult negotiations, China only needs to give up the data security business to the US joint venture and fully retain TikTok's US business operations and intellectual property rights. On the surface, Trump won the prize. In fact, China can be said to have won a great victory in this negotiation. In addition, Trump announced new tariffs. On the evening of September 26, he posted on social media that the United States will impose a 50% tariff on all kitchen cabinets, bathroom cabinets, and related products on December 1st of this year, a 30% tariff on soft furniture, and a 25% tariff on all imported heavy trucks. At the same time, it also announced a 100% tariff on imported patents and branded premium goods, and, as an example, a 25% tariff on imported heavy trucks. In fact, back in April this year, the US Department of Commerce had already begun investigating this set of products, with the aim of determining whether the import of medium and heavy vehicles poses a threat to US national security. However, the US Chamber of Commerce has previously stated that the top 5 sources of heavy vehicle imports to the US are Mexico, Canada, Japan, Germany, and Finland. All of these are US allies or close partners and do not inherently pose a threat to US national security. Regardless, Trump has announced plans to raise tariffs. A veteran in the US maritime shipping industry told a reporter from Yikai Global that among the heavy trucks imported into the US, in fact, it is still unclear whether Mexican products will be exempt from tariffs due to the USMCA. Part of the purpose of increasing tariffs is to promote American manufacturing and give American factories an advantage when competing with foreign products. However, Trump's previous 50% tariffs on steel, aluminum, and copper have pushed up the import prices of these metals, which has significantly increased costs for American truck manufacturers. This means that Trump's tariffs have made some American trucks more expensive than trucks produced by foreign manufacturers. As for the 100% tariff on imported specialty pharmaceuticals, Trump said that unless companies have already started building manufacturing plants in the United States, the new 100% tariff will apply to all brand and specialty pharmaceuticals. The U.S. Pharmaceutical Association said earlier this year that 53% of the $85.6 billion in pharmaceutical ingredients consumed in the United States are produced here, and the rest come from Europe and other major US allies. In response to this news, the stock prices of Asian pharmaceutical companies fell. For example, the stock price of Japan's Tsushima Pharmaceutical fell 4.3%, and the Australian CSL's stock price has fallen to a 6-year low due to Trump's persistent threats to impose drug tariffs. Over the past few months, many major pharmaceutical companies have announced plans to build factories in the United States. To date, more than a dozen companies have pledged to invest over $350 billion in the United States for manufacturing, R&D, and other operations. However, producing drugs in the United States will not be cheap. Huang Yanzhong, Senior Fellow for Global Health at the Council on Foreign Relations, said that the cost of developing new drugs for American pharmaceutical companies is extremely high. In the past, developing a new drug might cost $1 billion and take many years. If the US government requires American pharmaceutical companies to lower prices while also requiring them to produce locally, it may force pharmaceutical companies to outsource R&D to foreign countries to reduce costs, which may in turn deepen American pharmaceutical companies' dependence on overseas R&D and run counter to the initial impact of the localization strategy of Chinese companies. As for the 30% or 50% tariff on furniture, it will have a slight impact on Chinese products. According to a report in the industry publication Furniture Today, the value of US furniture imports in 2024 will be, it is about $25.5 billion, a 70% increase over 2023, of which about 60% comes from countries such as Vietnam. Last year, the United States imported about $5.94 billion of furniture from China, accounting for about 23.3% of the total furniture imports of the United States. In August of this year, Trump promised to impose new furniture tariffs, saying that this would bring furniture business back to North Carolina, South Carolina, and Michigan. According to US government statistics, jobs in the furniture and wood products manufacturing industry in the United States have been reduced by half since 2000, and there are only 340,000 jobs now. However, in the past year, the various tariffs imposed by Trump have significantly pushed up furniture prices. The US public statistics showed that the overall price of furniture in the United States rose by 4.7% last month compared with August last year. Among them, the price of living room and dining room furniture rose particularly much, up 9.5% in the past 12 months. It can be summarized as follows. First, Trump imposed tariffs on different goods rather than targeting a specific country, such as China. Even if those markets, for example, furniture and paper products from China, have a relatively large import volume, but the impact on China is limited. This is different from the 2018 Trump 1.0 era, when tariffs were specifically imposed on China. Factories would move to places like Vietnam and India to save on tariff costs. But now that the US has implemented a unified tariff, companies no longer need to relocate from China because they pay the same tax everywhere. Secondly, Trump's call for factories to move back to the US is not as easy as imagined. The US not only lacks skilled labor, but also faces high production costs, ultimately leading to sustained inflation. In August of this year, Goldman Sachs estimated that Americans shouldered 86% of the cost of the new tariffs. Trump was furious and blasted Goldman Sachs CEO David Solomon, saying he should focus on DJing instead of running a large financial institution. While Goldman Sachs' statement may be true, Trump is unwilling to accept it. Furthermore, in a quick commentary on the Stone Tower stage, I want to talk about Trump's hour-long boast at the UN General Assembly. He criticized global allies and wanted to win the Nobel Peace Prize, but he didn't mention the dire situation in Gaza.